3rd of February, down 1. So welcome to today's presentation from U3A Helderberg. Good morning to you all from here in Somerset West. I'm Richard Tompkins, the current chairperson of U3A Helderberg and your host for the presentation. And of course, a special welcome to our visitors viewing with us. We owe our thanks to our studio director today, Johan Rothman, who is coordinating proceedings. We're presenting on YouTube via the program StreamYard. For novices to this medium, we cannot see you, but there is a chat area where questions to the speaker can be typed. Bearing in mind time constraints, Johan will select those of your questions that would be of general interest to all and show them on your screen. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Megan Emmett-Parker. By way of background, Megan is a passionate conservationist and environmentalist, having degrees in both subjects. She was a senior producer on the SABC program 50/50 for over 10 years and has authored several books about the Bushveld. Her topic today is entitled 100 Bushveld Trees. We here at the coast in the Helderberg are some 2,000 kilometers away from the Bushveld, but I'm sure most of you have delightful memories of visiting low-veld areas such as the northern part of the Kruger Park, through to and including southern Zimbabwe and eastern Botswana. Obviously, the best-known tree in the low-veld is the baobab. On that note, over to Megan.
Well, good morning, U3A Helderberg. It's wonderful to be with you this morning. Thank you for having me along and affording me the privilege, really, of sharing about my favorite topic, which is bushveld trees. And why 100 bushveld trees? Well, the talk takes its name from my book, 100 Bushveld Trees, which is a piece of work that was put together simply out of my passion for helping people learn about this wonderful subject. And why 100? Well, there's so many trees out there. There's thousands of trees out there, in fact. Bushveld trees and trees all over our very diverse South Africa. And really 100 was a simple scoop of the commonmost trees that one would find out in the bush. So don't fret, I don't plan to go through 100 trees with you today, just a couple, and just to whet your appetites, really, hopefully to improve your experience, really, when you get to the bushveld and your desire to learn and to know more. I always like to start my presentation with the idea of if trees could talk, what would they say? So we almost think, I suppose, of trees as inanimate objects. They're not. They're living organisms, but they are just there. They don't move around like animals. And so if they did have voices and if they could communicate with us, what would they be saying? And I think personally that trees would tell us that we have done them a disservice, that we have not appreciated them for all that they are. And if you think about it, trees give us oxygen to breathe. They give us fruit, apples and avocados, my favorite, all kinds of wild fruits. Play in trees. They climb trees when they're young. We picnic underneath trees. They are so much a part of our lives and yet so overlooked. And aside from all of that, they are also just fun. I have so many bush memories. And at the backdrop, or in the backdrop of my bush memories, there's always some kind of a tree that features there. So aside from them having these uses, they also just provide the landscapes that we love out there. And just by way of example, I'd like to show you this photograph, which is a photograph of myself many moons ago when I was training guides up in the Makuleki region of the Kruger National Park. And any of you that have been right up into that Pafuri region would know that it gets exceptionally hot in the summertime, sometimes pushing sort of 45, 47 degrees and 80% humidity. It's really, really hot. and we'd been out for an early walk into the fever tree forests, and we're sort of ambling back to camp on a very hot morning when we happened upon this herd of buffalo. And you can see just to the right of the screen, under those lala palm trees, just some dark shapes. And the one thing you don't want to happen upon when there are lots of lala palms around are buffalo, because you don't know if you go around this side of the lala palm, if there's going to be a buffalo around the other side of the lala palm. They make a lot of noise, they rustle, and so you don't know if it's a buffalo or if it's just the wind. So it's not ideal to kind of be in this landscape with buffalo. But more than that, when you are viewing game out there in the bush and on foot, you want to do so without disturbing the animals. And in this context, it was a tree. It was, in fact, the jacket plum tree that I have my back leaned against there, that saved the day, in the sense that this tree is growing on a termite mound. We were able to creep up as a group, it was a small group of us, onto the termite mound and sit in the shade where we both had cover and security from the buffalo, and they were totally unaware of us. And they eventually came right out into that clearing, and we were able to watch the buffalo probably for a good half an hour, and they carried on their way, and then we were able to get back to the camp. And perhaps not the most remarkable sighting you've ever heard about, but the point of my story is simply that had that tree not been there, we would not have had that encounter. It gave us the shade to be able to escape that 45-degree heat, and it gave us the cover that we needed to be invisible, really, to those buffalo. And when I think back to stories of my time in Makuleki, so much of it is just framed by, for example, those beautiful fever trees and lala palms you can see in the background. So I can't think of the area and think of some of the magnificent sightings and things that I've done there without, in my mind, seeing those beautiful green stems and hearing the rustle of the leaves of those lala palms, because trees just are so much a part of our backdrop for all our stories out there. At this point, I want to just say that it's my standard little disclaimer that I am not a botanical expert. I have a master's in environmental management. I've spent 20 years in the wildlife, ecotourism, and conservation arena, but I do not consider myself a botanical expert. I am merely a tree enthusiast. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, that is why I wrote my 100 Bushveld trees, and that is why I love sharing on trees, is simply to try and engender passion around this topic. So please don't shoot me, because I'm not going to pull out all the scientific jargon. In fact, I steer clear of it very intentionally, and I just want to put that out there right up front. So, as I've said, trees are not just a part of our stories. They are also very much a part of the bush's story too, and very much a fundamental component to any kind of ecosystem. And when we talk about ecosystems, I mean, just a baobab there, you can see how diminutive I really look inside that tree. And the baobab itself is an ecosystem. But when you are out there, and something like a baobab, I suppose, is quite obvious. It's an enormous tree, and everybody knows what a baobab looks like, but not everybody knows what everything else looks like. So where on earth do you start? Even with 100 trees, which I'm casually telling you is just a scoop of the most common out there, where on earth do you start? And with wildlife and on safaris, the most obvious place to start, of course, is with the big five. And so what I have done for the purposes of this talk is I have chosen what I consider to be the big five trees. These are obviously giants, massive, iconic trees that stand out above the landscape, that are ecologically important and that are very useful. And I've included this picture here just to further my point that so often when we are out in the bush and just take time to enjoy things like trees, it is often in those moments where you stop to look at a bird sitting in a branch, or if you are just appreciating the tree. My husband and I were in the Kruger Park at the end of last year, which is when this picture was taken. The nyala trees that grow on the Mpongol Loop, sort of south of Shingwetsi, is just sort of a favorite of ours, and the trees are favorites. And I just loved this tree, and we stopped to admire it. And I don't know if you can see in this picture, but there's actually a leopard lazily languishing on that enormous branch. Normally we would drive past a tree like this and go, oh, isn't that the perfect place to see a leopard? And of course there wouldn't be one there, but on this occasion there actually was. And again, just a reminder that when we take time to just stop and enjoy the backdrop of what is out there, the trees, the vegetation, the ecology, that is so often when nature spoils us to these amazing sightings of the more exciting big and hairies. So of course, the first tree on our Big Five list has to be the baobab, Adansonia digitata. As I mentioned, a very iconic tree, a very obvious tree, and particularly when it has no leaves on it. In fact, the story goes that this tree was planted upside down, and that those, in fact, are its roots that are sticking out of the ground. It's a myth that was, or mischief, I should say, that was perpetuated by the hyena. And the hyena really, or the animals, were given the seeds to go and fertilize and germinate the earth by the gods at the beginning of time, or so the story goes. And because the hyena was given his seeds last, he was put out, and so he planted his tree upside down, being the baobab, and that's why its roots stick out the ground, or so the story goes. But in fact, the tree is very leafy in the summertime. It's got this beautiful leafy canopy, and as previously mentioned, these trees in and of themselves provide entire ecosystems just in the boughs of the tree. A slightly closer look, those are what the leaves of a baobab look like. They are what we call palmately compound leaves. I'm not going to go into all the technical stuff today, but for those who are interested in that kind of thing. And an interesting leaf format, really, because we're all used to compound leaves that have a main vein and then the little shoots that go off the side. These all radiate around a central point, which makes them nice and easy to identify. But quite an interesting point is that actually baobabs have simple leaves when they are younger, which make the very little plants very difficult to identify, because they've only got one of those leaves per petiole when they are smaller. So a small baobab is actually quite difficult to identify. The bark, very characteristic in this tree, but more than just being something that helps us to identify it, not that we need to, this sort of molten mass of gray bark that looks like the tree was made of wax and got too close to the sun or something. But these enormous trees are actually held up without any wood. So the bark and the fiber of the tree, I think I have a picture there. It's very fibrous and contains 40% water. So there's no real hard wood inside these trees that get so wide. I mean, some of them can have diameters of about 5 meters and can stand for thousands of years. I think some of the trees have been dated to 1,000, 2,000 years old. And all of that is just really standing on a pile of fibers that local people typically will harvest to make things like sacks. They'll weave them into sacks. They'll make bracelets or braids. They'll make rope. The rope can be used for musical instruments or to tow cars, that kind of thing. So more heavy duty type of rope. So there's very, very strong fiber in there. And the water, in fact, is what makes elephants love baobabs so much, and also what gives the tree that very weather-beaten look, because the elephants will literally come in droughts and just absolutely ringbark these trees. And sometimes you can see that they've almost got these cavities that have been gnawed away in the side of the trees, and that's from the ellies trying to get that fiber for water. And a useful trait, actually, we can learn so much from ellies, but that humans can also chew those fibers if you are stuck for water in the bush. And then the tree, that molten outer layer of bark, will actually then heal given time, and the tree won't die necessarily from the damage that elephants cause, and it's just really baobabs and marula trees that have the ability to slowly seal up wounds. What is really incredible is that enormous tree, after its 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 year stay on the planet, literally can crumble into a heap of compost almost overnight. So that is what a dead baobab looks like, unlike the fallen hardwood trees that we sometimes find lying around the bushveld. A baobab literally just crumbles into a heap of pulp at the end of its life, which is quite remarkable to see. There's a nice indication of the way that the bark heals. And what happens with the elephants damaging the trees, and then also this propensity to cover over wounds, is that these enormous natural cavities form in the trees. And that has a very important function ecologically, and over time has proved very important culturally, because if the cavity doesn't sink all the way to the bottom of the tree, in other words, if the tree is not entirely hollow, which many are, this one that I'm standing on actually was hollow all the way down, and there were pieces of wood that had been knocked into the inside of the tree that you could climb down into it, and it was used as a granary in times gone by the local people to store their grain. Sometimes they're used as kilns. More modern uses, I mean, they've put bars and all sorts of things inside them. But ecologically, water often accumulates in these cavities in baobab trees, which makes them very attractive to all manner of different animals. So jennets, bush babies, tree-living animals, even leopards will often source water in baobabs, particularly during times of drought. And then, of course, things like bees often make their nests in those very high branches of a baobab, and then they also have a readily available source of water to access, so that they can obviously keep their nest cool and look after their larvae inside the nest. That is what a baobab flower looks like, or at least one that has fallen off the tree and landed on the ground. And another really nice ecological quirk, that lovely brush, I always say it looks like a woman's powder brush, is specifically designed for the straw-colored fruit bats that pollinate these trees. The flowers have a very strong sort of carrion smell. It's not a pretty smell that attracts the bats. And as they come to the flowers, the fur on their chests is dusted by these powder brushes, and they fly from flower to flower and pollinate the tree at night. Flowers are on the tree only for 24 hours before they fall onto the ground. And there's a lovely myth that says that there are all kinds of spirits that live in a baobab tree, and that one should never pluck a flower off the tree. They must fall onto the ground on their own, because you may infuriate the spirits, who will then, in spite, cause a lion to eat you. So whatever you do, don't pluck a flower from a baobab tree. And then the fruit that eventually forms are these lovely, large, woody pods, and that's probably the size of two big gem squash joined together. They're very woody, very hard, lovely velvet covering. Those shells are often collected as snuff boxes, but those pips inside are, the baobab is known as a crème-tart-boom in Afrikaans. It's got cream of tartar in them, so very refreshing, and the pips can be sucked to relieve thirst. They can also be roasted and ground up for coffee or used in soups. And there's a lovely oil inside the seeds themselves, which is very high in protein and rich in vitamin D, and often with the baobab products that you see, cosmetic products that you see on the shelves these days, it is that vitamin D and the other natural oils in the seeds that is being extracted for use because of the cosmetic values. I think I did mention that they're good for thirst, and you can also make a drink from the seeds of a baobab to help relieve fevers. So from one giant to the next, this is a sausage tree that you see here. And the fruit, I suppose, in many ways is a little bit reminiscent of the baobab fruit, although these are much, much larger. And so as big and green and leafy and delightful as these trees look, as a place under which to have a picnic, this is not a tree under which I would recommend you have a picnic, because those fruits that look like sausages hanging at in a butcher's window, an old-fashioned butcher's window, can actually get up to 10 or 12 kilograms in weight and measure 1 meter in length. So they are very solid. And although they do hang on the tree for sometimes up to a year, you just never know when a sausage is going to fall off the tree, and you don't want to have either your car parked underneath one or tempt fate by picnicking underneath one, lest it should decide to fall off the tree. The tree may become prolifically covered in these sausages, and there can be more than one per stalk. And the reason for that is because of the beautiful flowers, these lovely bright red flowers. And like the baobab, these are also pollinated by bats. You can see the structure there of the stamens, how they're very outward facing. Again, also not a very nice smelling flower. It attracts the bats, who then once again get dusted with the pollen and fly from flower to flower doing their job. But 3, 4, 5 flowers on a stalk like that, and you end up with a whole butcher's rack of sausage hanging from the sausage tree. And there's all manner of different beliefs about the sausages on a sausage tree in terms of treatments, traditional treatments. They have been quoted as being used for syphilis, for rheumatism, for skin ulcerations, for acne, stomach troubles, lactation problems. There's even rumors of genital enlargement ceremonies that are all performed with the sausages. Or extracts of these sausages on the sausage tree. And they are also believed to deter whirlwinds. So another tree very much revered. Also just pop this picture in for those interested in the smaller details of the trees. This is a more typical compound leaf, where we saw the baobab had the palmately compound. This is now a imparipinnately compound. So basically in a simple leaf, if you could imagine that the veins of the leaf became leaflets themselves, that is a standard simple compound leaf known as a peripinnate leaf. And those are really quite large as well, very large and leathery in texture. There's a nice picture of the bark, just to give you an idea. Although once again, not really features that you need to identify these big iconic trees out there. They are fairly self-evident. So all kinds of things there you can just see in that picture on the left, the size of the leaves relative to those sausages hanging on the tree. They really are very large and lush when the tree certainly has got new leaves. It's a very bright green and just beautiful. There's all manner of creatures that like to eat the sausages, even though they are probably quite toxic to humans, and unless they are eaten once ripened. And you can eat them, I think, once they are ripened, but they're not terribly edible for humans. But animals, in the early days, people said, oh no, nothing eats a sausage. But that's not true. They are eaten by monkeys, baboons, giraffes, zebras, porcupines, bush pigs, squirrels. All manner of creatures utilize these fruit. But probably the one that surprised me the most is that they are relished by hippos, and particularly hippopotamuses that are found in the Luangwa Valley. So in the Luangwa, it's probably 1,000 odd kilometers of river, 1,100 kilometers of river, and the largest population of hippos in Africa live on this river. There's some 30,000 hippos along the Luangwa River. And this is a river that is very seasonal. It's an arm of the Rift Valley. And when it floods in the summertime, when there's good rains, it's wonderful, and it supports this enormous population of hippos. But gradually the river dries up into the dry season, the heart of which is October. And all these poor hippos then have to move into the wafwas, the oxbow lagoons, and compete for a little bit of water or a little bit of mud to oversee the dry season. And the grass on the floodplains also dries up at the same time. And so literally one can find a hippo standing under a sausage tree, literally waiting for those sausages to fall off so that they can eat them, because those sausages help to sustain the hippos through this very drought-ridden dry season. Understandably, there's a lot of competition, not necessarily over the sausage fruit, but just at a time of strife where there is no water in the river, or there are limited patches of deep water in the river. Obviously, if a bull can secure a patch, he can secure a whole lot of females and breeding rights with that female. And so there's a lot of fighting that goes on in the Luangwa Valley, and the sound of hippos fighting is very synonymous with the area and quite blood-curdling, I must say. This photo is lovely in the sense that it depicts the opposite poles at which everything happens in a hippo's world. So those huge canine teeth that are used to show off their prowess and to say, you know, look at me, I've got these sharp weapons, don't mess with me. And that goes along with all the noise, and that happens at the one pole of the body. And then close to the screen, you can see that silly little piggy tail, which is being flapped left to right and smearing the dung everywhere. And that's very much also part of the display process. Hippos will flick that dung all around the place in the process of competing. And only once things get really, really serious, and you can see there's just puddles in the middle of the river left over, will they really engage in all-out combat, which often leads to the demise of one of the parties, sadly. I think this one probably didn't die from a fight, although he would have been chased away. But you can see here in one of the drying oxbow lagoons how dire things can really get for hippos. But of course, it creates a heyday for the predators and for the scavengers. And that is one of the things that the valley is certainly well known for. Another little scavenger I think we all know well is this little fellow. And he would probably have had his stake in that hippo as well, once he could get in there around the hyenas and the lions. But this fellow is so resourceful that he has an entire tree named after him. And of course, I'm talking about the jackalberry, the Diospyros mispiliformis. And Diospyros literally means the pear of the gods. And this tree is very much named for its fruit. It's not pear-sized, nor does it taste like a pear. It's berry-sized and very sweet once it is ripened. And of course, any tree that has got good fruit that is berry-sized and tasty is going to attract all manner of primates. And baboons in particular love the fruit from the jackalberry. They will obviously loosen the fruit and drop it onto the ground as they go about foraging in the trees and drop them onto the floor. And that's when the jackals will come and actually feed on these fruit, which is quite unusual, I think, for a carnivore. But the jackal, as I said, is incredibly resourceful and sorry, just lost my train of thought, is incredibly resourceful and omnivorous. And so they eat both plant and animal matter. Baboons, like other primates, have color vision, which is a trait which is really useful when you're eating things like fruit, because you are then able to see whether the fruit is ripe or not. And so their forward-facing eyes are very much used to gauge depth and distance when they're moving around the trees. And then they can also, as I mentioned, they can see the fruit and choose fruit that are more ripe. Obviously, alkaloids and toxins are present in the greener fruits, but it does also make nocturnal vision difficult. So at nighttime, it's difficult to see, and that's when baboons need to go up into the trees to get away from danger, much like humans with our color vision. Having color vision does, of course, help when it comes to reproductive matters as well. This is not a baboon, this is a vervet monkey, but the same principle. We've all seen a baboon's red bottom when she is ready to mate. And similarly, vervet monkeys are able to impart this idea of dominance and sexual readiness just through colors. So it's another part of the social dynamics, I suppose, or the social functioning within these more advanced animals, that they can use color cues if they have color vision. But of course, it does limit things when it comes to nighttime, and so the baboons will go up into these beautiful big jackalberries at night to get away from danger. But that has its advantages, because obviously when you wake up in the morning, there you are in the tree ready to have your breakfast. And that is what a nice ripened jackalberry fruit looks like. They are edible to humans and quite delicious, actually. You can also collect them and make jams and jellies and even brandies. And things like green pigeons, that bird in the top right there, love these pear of the god fruits. And there's inevitably green pigeons in association with the jackalberry trees. Aside from the primates that also love the fruit, and the jackals, things like civets will come at night, also omnivorous mammals, and they will scrounge up all this fruit. Nyalas, bushbuck, those kind of animals also very much dependent on the fallen fruits. So a very popular tree when it comes to the fruits that grow on it. There's a nice example of the leaves. Very easy tree to recognize from its leaves. It's got these lovely simple leaves with wavy edges. And the smaller plants, if you can believe that that enormous tree I showed you there starts off as a little scrubby bush that looks like that, but easily recognized from the fact that it has red leaves on the young plants. So if you're wandering around drainage lines or along the rivers where these trees like to grow, and you find this shrubby looking bush that's got a lot of red on it, chances are that is a jackalberry, and that's how you would identify a baby one. The bark of the jackalberry makes it very easy to identify at a distance. So if earlier I said, you know, it's not so important to know a baobab's bark or a sausage tree's bark, but at a distance, sometimes these trees are difficult to tell apart because they're all enormous and all leafy and green, and they all merge and blend into one big swathe of riverine forest. But the jackalberry, this is actually one tree. It branches quite low down often and splits, so you'll get two trunks like this. They have very black bark, and the black bark is then overwashed with a white sort of ashy color. So it almost looks like a fire has come through the area and made the bark go black and then left a bit of ash on the trunks as well. So a nice, easy one to identify. And then one of the key uses of these trees traditionally was for makoros, for traditional dugout canoes. That one that you're seeing there is in fact a fiberglass one. It's not made from an actual jackalberry tree, but the very straight, thick, dense trunks on the jackalberry is what made them suitable for these traditional makoros. The next tree is a tree that I would not recommend you attempt to make a boat from it. So the leadwood, where the jackalberry has lovely straight trunks and is perfect for carving, the leadwood is so dense and so heavy as a hardwood tree that if you made a boat from this tree, it would land up on the bottom of the swamp or the river or wherever you chose to row it. So that in itself is a really important feature for the leadwood, the Combretum imberbe, as they are called, in that these trees are so hard. They have a density of 1.2 tons per cubic meter. Water, just as a reference, is a ton per cubic meter. And so when they die, the trees will actually sometimes stand as dead corpses and anatomies in the field for longer than they were alive. So they've been carbon dated, these old anatomies, to hundreds of years old. And the reason for that is because the wood is too hard for even the decomposers, the termites, to get in there and to break them down. Just to point out the leafy version on the right there, I'm going to talk about the leaves shortly, but you can see that the tree generally has a very overall gray color. So where the sausage tree had those lovely bright green leaves, and a baobab also has these lovely vibrant canopies, and the jackalberry has dark green foliage, this tree often stands out amidst all the others along a riverine area because it has yellowish, grayish foliage and just an overall gray look, and beautiful really when the sun catches them. But the important thing of having these anatomies standing in the field, once again, nature is so clever. A bird such as a vulture, they are modified for their own niche. So they have very flat feet, and this is so that they can hop on the ground and hop around carcasses without too much trouble. But it makes it very difficult to perch. Also, they have a massive wingspan, and so when you have these enormous wingspans and you're trying to take off from a tree like a jackalberry, for example, you're going to get all entangled and probably end up crashing to the ground. So the leadwood trees are just perfect perching grounds. They're hard, they're solid, and often you'll find if there's a kill in an area, or if the weather is bad, that these birds will accumulate in these leadwoods, and they will sit there and they will dream about their next meal on these beautiful leadwood anatomies. And this is one of the things that has made this bird so vulnerable, really, as a sought after muti product, is because they are believed to be able to see the future. And it is thought that when they are sitting on these dead anatomies, looking into the future and dreaming about the future, that they can actually see into the future, and that they have a sense of premonition and a sense of being able to predict the future. And so vultures are used very heavily in muti for things like the lotto, to win the lotto, which is very sad. They are incredibly important birds in terms of cleaning up the veldt and going in behind those stinky hippos when the hippos have passed away in the Luangwa Valley and they need to be consumed. And sorry, my dogs are just wanting to say hello to everyone in the middle of all of this, and apologies for the disruption, the ins and outs. So these birds are important because they consume those stinky hippos once they've died, and they clean up after the lions and the hyenas. And that is the reason that they have got these naked heads as well, that there's no feathers on the heads of the vultures, because they've got to stick their heads right into the carcass. And those lovely feathers that you can see there in profile is called a ruff. And the bird is able to then raise those to warm up their necks. And when they're flying high in the sky where it's cold, or just on a cold day, and that is how it has evolved, I suppose, a scarf in its evolution. The other characteristic about a leadwood trunk is that it is so hard that it burns for an incredibly long time. And it's one of the reasons that leadwoods are in fact protected, is because they take so long to grow and they are so hard. And people love to use them as firewood because they're going to roast for a very long time, or sorry, not roast, glow. The coals are going to burn for a very long time, and so it makes for a nice bushfire. But in fact, the wood is important that it stays in the veld, so that all the things that need to live underneath it, and where the grass is replenishing and growing up through the carcass of this wood. Sorry, please excuse me for 1 second. I just need to close the door because we have intruders in the space of noisemakers. Please give me 1 second. I suppose this is the thing that happens in COVID times, is that there's households full of people and things that are happening. So yeah, my deepest apologies. My dogs are misbehaving, and yes. Anyway, I'm back and telling you about this wonderful hardwood that the leadwood is, and how it plays its ecological role, and it needs to stay in the veld, and that these trees are protected, and it's important that they remain protected. The one benefit of the coals that burn for such a long time is this wonderful white ash that they produce. And traditionally, once again, the cultural use of this was as a toothpaste, because the ash is very abrasive. And so people are able to use it to brush their teeth, and it would actually clean their teeth really beautifully. And then also when mixed with milk, it formed a really nice whitewash, so like a substitute for paint. So back in the day, when it wasn't such a problem to burn them because they weren't considered protected, those are some of the uses of this tree. I mentioned that when the sun shines on them, they're really beautiful because they've got this lovely gray colored bark. But also, like the jackalberry, I suppose that's black, the white contrast, but lovely scales on a leadwood. It looks like, if you look at that small inset picture, the scales on the back of a reptile's back. It's a lovely tree to identify just from its bark because of those small little blocks on the tree, and when the light is shining on them, those blocks are even more evident, and that texture is so lovely and evident. And the texture is something that is extended into other parts of the tree as well. So the leaves of the leadwood have these tiny little gray pixelizations, I call them, like the spots on an out of focus television. And it's a nice way in a young leadwood, perhaps where it's not so apparent what tree it is, to be able to say, this is the leadwood, it's got the little spots on the surface. You can see the growth structure on the right-hand side there, and if I show you that photo, the one thing many people don't realize is that leadwoods, when they are young, have these spines on them. And this is something that a lot of trees do. The tambuti is another one, a young tambuti. When they are young and trying to grow out of the way of the browsing antelope, is that they will produce these spiny protrusions just till they grow out of browsing reach. All of the combretums have these lovely four-winged pods. They are very obvious. It's very apparent when you're looking at a combretum that is the family you're looking at. The leadwood has yellow pods, and the little hedgehog-like flowers you can see in the bottom there. Also very yellow. So that's what gives the tree its overall yellow-gray appearance, is the pods, those gray spots on the leaves, and the flowers and the bark. All of those different components either have a grayish or yellowish color. But the tiny little yellow pods in things like the russet bush willow or the red bush willow, those pods are slightly different colors. They're obviously red or russet colored, as the name suggests. And they can actually be used to make teas. So when sort of doused in boiling water and soaked in boiling water. Sometimes with the leaves, it makes a really refreshing, nice tea that you can drink. But you do need to pull the wings of the seeds apart and take the seed out, because should you eat those seeds, they've been known to give you chronic hiccups. So I wouldn't suggest that, although the hornbills eat them very voraciously. Last up of our big five is the marula, and this tree certainly needs no introduction. This is a tree I think that everybody knows by reputation, if not visually, but it's got such a lovely growth form to recognize in the form of the very upright trunk with the gray and white bark, and it branches very high up and just looks like that tree that you would draw as a child, sort of here's my tree, here's the trunk, here's a branch, and here's the canopy all the way around the top. And of course, it makes it perfect as a leopard tree. These cats love the marula trees, I think, because the boughs are quite leafless. The canopy really does stand right out on the ends of the branches, and yet affords them some shade, but they're able to just lie on those big reclining branches and be comfortable up the tree and have a good vantage all around them. Of course, the tree is known for its fruit, for its marulas. They taste a little bit, I suppose, like a citrus mango. The fruits are probably the size of golf balls, if you've never seen one, and absolutely delicious. They've got 10 times more vitamin C in them than an orange, and that is why elephants absolutely adore them. And they fruit in February and March, and the fruit fall to the ground and they ripen on the ground and become yellow, and that is where the ellies will harvest them from and literally just consume masses and masses of these delicious and very vitamin-rich fruits. There's even a suspected relationship with elephant bulls that are coming into must, that they enhance and boost their immune systems through the consumption of this vitamin C. So there's the pip inside the marula. There's not a lot of flesh on the fruit. You have to almost gnaw it off, suck it off and gnaw it off with your teeth. But inside that pip is a almond-like nut. And that is what the squirrels are always after. If you see a squirrel sitting in a tree eating one of these marula nuts, it's trying to get to that nut. And like the baobab, there's a lot of oils and vitamins inside the seed, and they're used for all sorts of purposes. You can actually use the oils extracted from marulas as a meat preservative. It can be rubbed on meat if you have no refrigeration, and then also in the cosmetic industry as well. There's lots of healing properties with marulas, antihistamine properties from various different parts of the plant. So lots of oils and naturally occurring substances that are used medicinally from this tree. And of course, if we're going to talk medicine, we can't leave out the amarula. That is definitely good bush medicine. There's a long-standing association with ellies, as I just mentioned, with them eating the fruit. But they also destroy these trees. They push them over because marulas have got lots of dissolved sugars and water in their roots. And they also will strip the cambium, so the vascular layer of tissue, away from the trees to get at those dissolved sugars that are being transported up and down the main stems of the trees. And just definitely something that the ellies focus on at particular times of the year to get at all that dissolved nutrient. And pushing over the trees, although it is destructive in many respects, it creates microhabitats. So like I was saying with the leadwood, a fallen log protects the ground underneath it and allows seedlings to establish as the grass grows through smaller animals, birds, rodents, scrub hares, things like that can create homes and burrows and nests under there. And so it's a very important part of what is the word I'm looking for? But the ecological processes that happen out there. It's not always as simple as what meets the eye. That is a lunar moth on the left-hand side, and another species that lives in very close association with the marula, and its caterpillars eat the marula leaves as their larval plant. Beautiful big moths. They probably are the size of a full sort of palm and extended fingers. I have done way too much talking, and I had thrown in the nyala tree as a bonus tree. We've got through the big 5. This was going to be the big 6, but I feel like perhaps I'll just whiz through, as I'd like to leave a few minutes for questions. So you saw this tree earlier on, also called a nyala, a mashatu tree. This was the one that the leopard was reclining in right at the beginning. Just absolutely enormous trees. You can see the Land Rover parked underneath it. I mean, it just is minuscule in comparison to the tree. And another really special one as far as providing ecosystems and homes to all manner of different animals, mostly because of that very dense canopy that comes right down. I mean, the leaves even grow out of the bark of this tree. It branches low. There's lots of foliage. It's a wonderland as a place for animals to live and to hide. Very yellow bark. And those little seeds this is the only leguminous plant that produces berries. So legumes are usually things like beans. The acacias have the leguminous pods. They've got a lovely relationship with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So they absorb nitrogen from the atmosphere and incorporate it into the soil. And this tree is a legume. And even though it has these berries and is not typical, but nyala trees, wherever they grow, improve the soils. They're also phreatophytes, meaning, so I'm just going back to this picture. You can see it's growing on a termite mound there, which are nutrient hotspots, but those roots will go all the way down to the groundwater. A phreatophyte is an indicator of groundwater, and these trees tap into that. So they really are able to access the best of even arid environments in terms of being able to get the resources that they need to grow into these enormous beasts. And of course, named after the nyala, that remarkably is actually only one tree, also branching low with the termite mound having grown through the middle of it. But the nyalas, being berry-loving and flower and fruit-loving animals, obviously relish the berries that fall onto the ground, and that's where it got its name from. Trees that absolutely dwarf elephants. And there we have it. I'm hoping that some of the information that I've been able to share with you has left its mark on you just a little bit, in the same way that it's left its mark on me, and that in your future encounters with bushveld trees, you will stop to think, what is it that you have to say? What is it that makes you as a species, as a tree in this environment important? And how are you going to contribute to my story and my journey in experiencing the amazing ecosystems present in the bushveld regions? So just a very quick thank you for joining us. We've got a little special we'd like to offer the attendees of this talk. So there's a 10% discount and free delivery on 100 bushveld trees if anyone is interested at Exclusive Books Somerset West. I'll just quickly pop to this slide showing you what the book looks like on the inside. Everything is written in English. As I said, I'm not a botanist, and I believe in speaking English when I speak about trees. So everything is written very simply in very plain English. Lots of color photographs of all the different parts of the plant, some nice information on the uses, the kind of information I've shared in this talk. And then if you don't even want to look at the pictures or read about them, there's a quick ID there on the left-hand side that just gives you the most poignant points in terms of how you identify trees. So that's what's on the inside. So please, if you would like to take use of this discounted offer, feel free to do that. And on that note, I'm going to hand back to Richard.
Your time today for such an interesting and informative talk. Now we will be motivated to look twice at our many and varied trees locally to try and learn their names. There are a few minutes left for questions. If you want to ask any questions, just use the chat box on the right and type it in, and it'll come up on the screen, or your hand will bring it up on the screen. I see there's one, Johan, there's one there from Judy. Just thanks. So that's how it works on StreamYard. That's how your questions come up if they're chosen. Right, thanks. Another question? Megan?
That needs to be a little bit specific. Which trees are we talking about in particular? I suppose the nyala trees, the mashatus. And I don't have a definitive answer, I'm afraid. I have no idea how old they get, except to say probably hundreds of years. Yeah, those really big giant trees take such a long time to grow. And I think once they reach that size, they're known to stand for many, many years. So I don't know definitively, but my guess would be 100 or hundreds of years until a flood comes along, of course, and takes them out. Does an apple bee tree have a taproot? Is it also an indicator of an apple leaf tree? The apple leaves, yes, absolutely. They are also phreatophytes and indicate the presence of groundwater. So that, I think, is the Phalaenoptera violacea that you're talking about, the apple leaf tree, also known as the rain tree. Anything else? Apple leaf, yes, that's correct.
we live and learn. So some of us have a long way to go.
The Phalaenoptera violacea, referring to those, they've got beautiful purple flowers that they become covered in sort of August, September. So it's a lovely Latin name, actually, the violacea.
Any further questions? I can't see any more. No, well, thank you. That's great and concludes today's presentation. Please join us again on Wednesday, the 3rd of March at 10 a.m. when the speaker will be Professor Anwar Surman of UCT. His topic on the subject of eating and digestion will be the complex life of the gut, our second brain. Sounds intriguing, so please join us then. Goodbye for today from U3A Helderberg.